forecast tonight, more details emerge on the two drones found near the inner Korean border. The investigation finds that one of the unmanned aircraft, widely believed to be from North Korea, took nearly 200 pictures of key facilities in the south. Starting July 1st, school textbooks in the U.S. state of Virginia will identify the body of water between Korea and Japan as the East Sea, as well as the Sea of Japan. This after the state governor signs into law a landmark dual naming bill. U.S. President Barack Obama is expected to arrive in Seoul on April 25th for an overnight stay after his state visit to Japan, which strained ties between the two neighboring countries. With these stories and more next on Arirang News at 8. Good evening and thank you for joining us. It's Thursday, April 3rd here in Seoul. I am Yoo Ji-hye. We begin this evening with a troubling development about one of the two unmanned aerial vehicles recently discovered on South Korean soil. The investigation shows that the drones, widely suspected to be from the north, took nearly 200 photos of key facilities in the south, including the presidential office. Our Kim Hyun-bin has our top story.
South Korea's defense ministry says one of the two unmanned aerial vehicles recently found crashed in the country had taken dozens of pictures of the presidential office of Cheongwade. The ministry believes the drone, which was found north of Seoul in the city of Paju late last month, malfunctioned and crashed as it was headed back to North Korea. They added that the aircraft had flown at one point over the presidential office for 20 seconds, and a Japanese-made Nikon camera attached to it took around 190 pictures. The resolution of the pictures was low, but the plane had a wireless transmitter embedded into it. That raised speculation that Pyongyang could have received the photos in real time, but the ministry said Thursday that's impossible considering the rudimentary technology and low frequency of the equipment. The South's National Security Council Standing Committee held an emergency meeting on Wednesday to discuss the recent discoveries and to come up with plans to prevent UAVs from infiltrating the nation's air defense network. A second UAV was found on Monday on the Baekneung-do Island, 1 hour after hundreds of artillery rounds were exchanged between the two Koreas. According to unnamed government sources, the drone found this week was launched from an airport in Hwanghae-namdo, North Korea. South Korea's defense ministry says it had detected the drone on radar and tried to shoot it down, but it crashed on the island after running out of fuel. The two drones recently found are capable of loading up to 1 kilogram of explosives or chemical weapons. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
And speaking of North Korean provocations, the top U.S. military official in the South warns that the atmosphere on the Korean peninsula is ripe for a surprise assault by the North, while relaying concerns over the slashing of the U.S. defense budget. Our Song Ji-sun reports.
North Korea could strike Seoul with limited or zero warning. That's how the commander of U.S. Forces Korea sees the situation on the Korean peninsula, just days after the two Koreas exchanged artillery fire across the western sea border. Speaking before a congressional committee in Washington Wednesday, General Curtis Scaparrotti said the Kim Jong-un regime is dangerous and has the capability to attack South Korea with little or no warning. The general assumed leadership of U.S. Forces Korea 6 months ago, says it is a common strategy of the North to come out of a period of calm with all guns blazing. But he also warned about a possible impact to crisis management in Korea from the Pentagon's budget cuts. Scaparrotti said his forces are prepared to counter a North Korean attack, but expressed concern about the readiness of follow-on forces that would be required in any prolonged fight. North Korea has long-range artillery that is capable of striking targets in Seoul, where 23 million Koreans and 50,000 Americans reside. The U.S. general's remarks came a matter of days after North Korea fired scores of shells into South Korean waters in apparent protest over the ongoing joint military drills between South Korea and the U.S. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
The North hasn't just been stepping up its military maneuvers in recent weeks, but also its rhetoric and warning of a fourth nuclear test. So will they follow through? Or Hwang Sung-hee looks into the possibility.
Just days after President Park Geun-hye laid out her plans for bringing the two Koreas together, the North launched verbal attacks and escalated military tensions on the Korean peninsula. Among the rhetorical rage was a nuclear threat, raising the question of whether a fourth nuclear test could be in the making.
We're in the middle of a cycle that may or may not turn into the standard escalation of threats. Small rocket launches, we're sort of there. Does it continue on to a nuclear test? I don't think it's clear they're going to test, but we could be on the way.
In the past, North Korea has shown a similar cycle of events leading up to its nuclear tests, beginning with a long-range rocket launch, a UN Security Council resolution, warnings of a nuclear test, and then the actual test. If history does in fact repeat itself, the North would conduct its fourth nuclear test sometime this month. Plus, North Korea has a lineup of events in April, like Kim Il-sung's birthday on the 15th, which is usually an occasion for the communist regime to shore up internal solidarity. A planned visit to Seoul by U.S. President Barack Obama in April and the ongoing joint military drills between Seoul and Washington are among the reasons for the North's recent outbursts. Some say that once the exercises end later this month, the tensions will also die down.
Could there be, on the other hand, could there be talks between South Korea and North Korea after the military exercises? Yeah, I could see that happening.
Despite the differing analyses of satellite images of North Korea's nuclear test sites, most experts agree that for the communist regime, it's merely a matter of choice, not capability, when it comes to conducting another nuclear test. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Along with a public announcement.
South Korea has named a new envoy to the six-party denuclearization talks. Hwang Jung-guk is currently the South Korean ambassador for defense burden sharing, acting as Seoul's top delegate for the special measures agreement negotiations with the United States. He is expected to begin his official schedule as a top nuclear negotiator in Washington next week, where he will meet with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts to discuss North Korea's nuclear program. Hwang is a veteran diplomat who has also served as the deputy chief of mission and minister for political affairs at the Korean embassy in Washington, D.C. He replaces Cho Tae-yong, who's been tapped to become the vice foreign minister. U.S. President Barack Obama is expected to swing by both Korea and Japan later this month amid strained relations between the two nations over historical and territorial issues. Our Choi Yu-sun says the American leader is most likely to stop in Seoul on April 25th.
U.S. President Barack Obama is expected to visit Korea for 2 days from April 25th to the 26th. During his fourth visit to Seoul as U.S. President, Obama will reaffirm the Seoul-Washington alliance and assess the implementation of the 2-year-old Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement with President Park Geun-hye. Amid Pyongyang's recent firing of missiles and its threat of a new form of nuclear test, North Korea-related security issues will likely dominate talks between the two leaders. Ahead of President Obama's trip, top nuclear envoys from South Korea, the U.S., and Japan will meet in Washington next week. The meeting is a follow-up to President Park's summit with her U.S. and Japanese counterparts on the sidelines of last week's nuclear security summit in The Hague. Before coming to Korea, President Obama will make a state visit to Japan starting on the 23rd. Sources in Washington say the U.S. has added a day to the president's Tokyo itinerary after Japan said 2 days wouldn't be enough to make Obama's state visit more meaningful. The last U.S. president to make a state visit to Japan was Bill Clinton in 1996. The Washington-Tokyo alliance and their negotiations for a 12-member Trans-Pacific Partnership free trade deal are likely to come up during President Obama's talks with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. But there's a greater attention towards how Obama will address relations between Washington's two main Asian allies, strained from Japan's denials of its imperialistic aggressions. The U.S. president will also visit the Philippines and Malaysia. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
The governor of the U.S. state of Virginia has put his signature on a landmark bill that will change the way students in the state learn how to name the body of water between Korea and Japan. This is largely thanks to a persistent campaign launched by a Korean-American group, which now hopes it will spread to other states. Our Connie Kim has the details.
From here on out, when students in the U.S. state of Virginia learn about the body of water that separates Korea and Japan, they'll learn to call it by two names, the EC and Sea of Japan. The Voice of Korean Americans says Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe has signed into law a landmark bill on the EC name. McAuliffe's approval was long anticipated as he was believed to be against the bill, at least initially. The law that takes effect on July 1st requires all textbooks in the state Virginia to identify the body of water by its Korean name, the EC, and its Japanese name, the Sea of Japan. The Japanese government had put in massive lobbying efforts to block the EC bill from getting approval. The campaign started with the Voice of Korean Americans. It says the name Sea of Japan is a cruel reminder of Japan's imperialist past, as the name was registered when the Korean peninsula was under Japanese colonial rule. Virginia is the first U.S. state to pass such a bill, and it'll likely have implications on other states in the U.S. 7 states currently use the same textbook as Virginia. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Yoo Ji-hye for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on Arirang TV.
Move aimed at fostering startups is part of the government's 3-year economic innovation plan. The head of the International Monetary Fund has applied some fresh pressure to both developed and emerging economies. Christine Lagarde called for more aggressive policies to accelerate a still modest global economic recovery. As Hun Jang-in reports.
IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde said the global economy is putting some distance between it and the Great Recession, but also says the overall growth remains too slow and too weak and faces multiple threats. In a speech at Johns Hopkins University on Wednesday, Lagarde cited 3 main obstacles to faster growth that the world economy is facing. The first is low inflation, particularly in the Eurozone and Japan, which could suppress demand, output, and jobs. The second was heightened market volatility in emerging markets, which, if not addressed properly, could worsen as advanced economies begin monetary tightening. The third obstacle, she said, was the rise of geopolitical tensions, especially surrounding Ukraine and Russia, which could put the global economic recovery at risk if not managed well. Lagarde said the IMF projects global growth this year to surpass last year's 3% rate, forecasting the U.S. expansion to be one of the strongest among advanced economies. She added emerging Asian economies are projected to grow 6.5% and China at a 7.5% rate. However, she warned that unless countries come together and formulate the right kind of policy measures, the world economy could be facing more years of slow growth. Son Jang-in, Arirang News.
China has unveiled a package of measures to support its economy over fears that a slowdown will threaten the country's growth target at 7.5% for 2014. The first stimulus measures proclaimed by the government this year include increased railway spending and offers of tax relief to small and mid-sized firms. Authorities will create a development fund of up to 300 billion yuan or $48 billion a year to increase sources for rail financing. Bloomberg says the world's second largest economy grew 7.4% last quarter from a year earlier. And it's not only Beijing government concerned about China's economy. Korea has one eye firmly fixed on the economic slowdown there. Seoul's finance minister called on policymakers to prepare to deal with any market instability factors. Arirang News' Hwang Ji-hye has more.
During a meeting with fellow policymakers on Thursday, Korean Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok expressed concerns of possible risks stemming from the slowing Chinese economy. Hyun said the government will closely monitor China's economic conditions to minimize possible effects from the slowdown, which could bleed into global financial markets. Citing the Chinese government's drive to boost domestic demand, the nation's top economic policymaker emphasized a shift in export strategy.
Korea's main export items to China should change from parts to consumer goods. And in the long term, the Korean economy should be able to deal with the slowing Chinese economy by seeking economic reforms.
In a separate issue discussed at the meeting, the Korean government laid out plans to become the world's 5th power nation in terms of overseas construction by 2017. Korea currently ranks 6th in the field, and construction contracts secured by Korean companies are expected to top $70 billion this year. Turning the nation's overseas construction into a higher value-added business is one of the key tasks in the government's 3-year economic innovation plan. To foster the construction sector, Hyun pledged financial support for small and medium-sized companies and also promised to build a foundation for research and development catered toward overseas construction businesses. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
The Korea's exports may lose some steam in the second quarter of this year due to external risks. That's an assessment by the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency based on a survey last month on buyers and employees from trading posts around the world. KOTRA says the leading index on exports was 51.9 in the second quarter, which is a 0.8 percentage point dip from the previous quarter. An index over 50 means that more people are expecting a rise in exports than a drop. By region, the index was over 50 in North America, Europe, and China, but below 50 in Japan and the Commonwealth of Independent States due to tension in Ukraine. Exports in semiconductor chips and textiles are expected to take the hardest hits. Let's check on some of the stories making headlines on the global front. From another powerful earthquake hitting Chile to the ongoing pilot strike in Germany, we go live to Paul Lee at the News Center. Nepal, let's start with a deadly quake in Chile. We hear a second major tremor has prompted another round of tsunami alerts along the coastline. How does this quake compare to Tuesday's?
Just one day after being hit with a strong magnitude 8.2 earthquake, Chile was rocked by a major aftershock measuring 7.6 on the Richter scale. No additional damage was reported, but it has people in the South American country wondering how much more they can take. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
A magnitude 7.6 aftershock shook the coast of Chile Wednesday evening, one day after an 8.2 magnitude quake in the same area killed 6 and damaged thousands of homes. The aftershock was centered about 40 kilometers southwest of the mining port city Iquique, 10 kilometers beneath the ocean floor. A tsunami warning was initially issued for Chile and Peru, but has since been lifted. This was the strongest of some 140 aftershocks that followed Tuesday's quake, but so far there have been no reports of any significant damage. Experts credit the preparedness of the Chilean government and its people for the low death toll. Chile isn't the only nation feeling the effects. Panama recorded a magnitude 5.8 quake near the Costa Rican border Wednesday. Although no damage was reported, some schools and hospitals were evacuated as a precaution. And as far as Japan, small tsunami waves washed up on the northern part of the island on Thursday morning, the remnants from the magnitude 8.2 earthquake in Chile a day earlier. And as for the damage in Chile, it's still too early to determine how high the total will go, but early estimates are at around $30 billion. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And moving now to another mass shooting in the United States. We hear it's the second one in 5 years in a Texas Army base. Now, Paul, what's the latest information on the gunman?
A soldier who was being evaluated for post-traumatic stress disorder opened fire at Fort Hood Tuesday evening, killing 3 of his colleagues and wounding 16 others before turning the gun on himself. A motive for the shooting is still unknown, but the soldier, identified as Ivan Lopez, was being treated for mental health issues. Officials say he had served in Iraq and was suffering from depression and anxiety. A security lockdown of the complex has since been lifted, but military police are still patrolling the area. Speaking in Chicago on Wednesday, President Barack Obama promised to get to the bottom of what happened.
We're heartbroken that something like this might have happened again. And I don't want to comment on the facts until I know exactly what has happened. But for now, I would just hope that everybody across the country is keeping the families and the community of Fort Hood in our thoughts and in our prayers.
Fort Hood is the same base where U.S. Army psychiatrist Nidal Hassan shot dead 13 soldiers and wounded 32 others back in 2009.
Right, Paul. And more tragic incident, this time in southern China, where a violent government crackdown on protesters killed 15 and 300 injured over the past 4 days. Paul, what was behind these demonstrations?
The Taiwanese media outlet Liberty Times says the fatal clashes erupted in the city of Maoming in Guangdong province. About 20,000 people have been protesting the construction of an industrial factory that would produce paraxylene, a chemical product used in making fibers and plastic bottles. Many local residents and student activists have expressed concerns about the environmental and health-related impacts of the project. Beijing is reportedly using tanks and other military vehicles to control demonstrators, while Chinese state media has been downplaying the protests. But eyewitness accounts and social media coverage on the growing violence are telling a much different story.
And Paul, lastly, tell us more about the ongoing pilots' walkout in Germany. I hear the strike is holding up travel and many ticket holders are affected.
That's right. The strike, extending into its second day now, has disrupted the travel plans of some 425,000 people. Lufthansa Airlines says it had to cancel 3,800 flights because of the three-day walk-off that runs through Friday. The airline warned its customers of the strike and is helping people book flights on other airlines. Lufthansa says it's likely to cost the company tens of millions of U.S. dollars. However, the pilots' union believes it's a small price to pay.
When you look at the economic damage, it is rather small. There are 200 airlines in Germany, and Lufthansa is just one of them. There is also Deutsche Bahn, and I believe that especially the cockpit union has been very hesitant about the strike so far. Over the past 10 years, Lufthansa pilots went on strike for exactly 1 day.
The pilots are mainly demanding for the reinstatement of an early retirement deal. Lufthansa says it would be willing to come back to the bargaining table if the union can come up with a better offer. GA?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that update. We'll see you back in just about 2 hours. Time to get a check on the weather with our Kim Bo-kyung, who is joining us here in the studio. Now, Bo-kyung, it was cloudy and drizzly unlike yesterday. How did other regions fare?
Well, Gia, it was pretty much the same in most parts of the country. Although it has stopped raining here in Seoul, it feels chilly due to the cold, strong winds. Taking a look at the current conditions, the nation is under the influence of a low-pressure trough, which is why those in the Chungcheongdo and Gyeongsangdo provinces are still seeing showers at this hour. A heavy snowfall watch has been issued on the mountains of Gangwon-do province, where 2 to 7 centimeters may fall through tomorrow. Later tonight, some parts of the central regions could get light passing showers, but it will only be less than 5 millimeters. Otherwise, tomorrow will be a clear day in most parts of the country, but it looks like we're in for a cold snap. Seoul starts off the day at 3 degrees, which is about 3 degrees lower than the seasonal average, with a daytime high of 12, and Busan reaches 14. Moving on to other regions, Daejeon and Jeju make it to 12 degrees. Morning showers are forecast in Dokdo and will get up to 7 in the afternoon. That's all the updates for Korea, and here's a look at the international weather.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul. I'll be back with more news updates on our primetime news at 10 p.m. Korea time. See you then.